The late 90s were what I like to think is one of the best times to be a PC gamer. After several years of game developers favouring AAA releases on home consoles with things like GoldenEye, Turok and Resident Evil to name a few, we finally started to get some genuine AAA games developed for PC, like Half-Life, StarCraft, Duke Nukem 3D, and of course the first two entries in the Unreal series, Unreal and Unreal Tournament. Sometimes when we look back on things, our nostalgia can distort how really good or really bad something was, but doing my best to take off my nostalgia goggles, it was what I think one of the best times and most fun times to be a PC gamer. Compare that with the state of PC gaming today, and there's a pretty stark difference. We've got games being developed for the home console market as their target release, and then being questionably ported over to PC. I've lost track of how many PC games I've played in the last year with performance issues or the dreaded shader compilation stutter, ironically most of which based on the Unreal Engine, but more on that later. Flashback to 1999, and after saving up for the last few years for a PC that wasn't a complete potato, I got my brand new PC home, featuring a 300 MHz Cyrix CPU and a Riva TNT GPU with a whopping 32 GB of RAM. Coming from an original Pentium, I was eager to see what the new PC could do. I don't remember the exact PC magazine I purchased at the time, but after having spent a good amount of time sitting on the toilet reading about it, I finally recalled tracking down a magazine which included the Unreal Tournament demo. To say I was blown away by the demo would be an understatement. I certainly didn't have the latest and greatest PC to play it, and I certainly wasn't going to be playing online with my 56k dial-up internet at the time, but the amount of fun that I had playing through the demo's 6 level and modes was immense. The whole concept that I was playing with other players competitively, even if they were bots, just blew my mind. I was getting a competitive experience in a solo game. Yeah, mind blown. Over the coming months of pretty much hammering the demo at every opportunity I got to use the PC, it didn't take me too long to save up enough to buy the full game. I still remember purchasing the game and rushing home to unbox and install it. No day one patches, no shader compilations, no account sign up required, just a glorious Unreal Tournament installer and you're ready to start gaming. Definitely was a simpler time, that's for sure. But before I go on about Unreal Tournament, I've got to give a nod to the game that started it all, 1998's Unreal. Coming from a home console gaming background up until about late 1999, I missed the original fanfare and launch of Unreal. I later went on to play Unreal after experiencing Unreal Tournament, and it was pretty obvious where a lot of the inspiration for Unreal Tournament had come from. Game universe building wasn't too easy in the 90s before technology helped to enable better immersion with things like interactive cutscenes and player choice, but Unreal was one of the first games that I can remember that actually created a believable universe. Clearly the gaming public also saw this, which was evident the fact that there were 9 other titles released over the next 16 years in the franchise. But back to the here and now, let's take some time to remember Unreal Tournament. Unreal Tournament wasn't necessarily the first game to offer a first-person shooter multiplayer experience, but I'd argue, discounting maybe Quake 3 Arena, it was absolutely one of the first ones that helped popularize it and introduced many of the concepts that are now staples of the modern first-person shooter experience. Things like Call of Duty, Battlefield, Halo and whatnot all owe a lot of their heritage to Unreal Tournament. So story-wise, the story takes place sometime after the events of the original Unreal and sees the New Earth government legalise consensual murder, basically enabling people to fight to the death in these arenas to help combat the growing violence among the New Earth mining colonies.
Right.
I don't know, maybe it's my public education talking, but I would have thought that some type of martial law or investment in policing might have been more effective to, combat the growing violence than allowing humanity to regress into some sort of Roman 3rd century BC lifestyle. But yeah, what do I know? Anyway, so at some stage after this consensual murder act was legalised, the Leandri Mining Corporation formed a professional league for these matches and created what is now called the Grand Tournament. This is what the player is effectively competing in. Basically, you need to play through a list of game types and matches, kind of like Mortal Kombat.
Flawless victory.
No pun intended. To become the grand champion. Pretty straightforward, right? The story obviously isn't going to win any awards, but I do give them credit for trying to create something semi-believable in the Unreal universe, as opposed to starting from scratch, as attaching the Unreal name to the game was certainly going to garner more attention than a franchise with no history. There's also the fact that once you get through the initial cutscene, the whole story is pretty much never mentioned again throughout the game, so yeah, not exactly pivotal to the Unreal Tournament experience. Of course, if you're playing for the multiplayer experience, which was available over LAN, now remember LAN parties, or the internet, you probably didn't care much for the story at all, so there's that. Another first in the Unreal Tournament kit bag was player customization. These days, we expect our games to enable us to customize everything from the gender to the eyebrows and everything in between, with many titles actually making bank from selling custom skins and cosmetic items. But in the 90s, we just didn't have that. In fact, thinking even harder, I reckon Unreal Tournament was the first FPS I ever played which let you choose between a male or female protagonist. I'm sure someone's furiously tapping away in the comments to prove me wrong here, but hey, that's what I remember. But it wasn't just a choice of genders that Unreal Tournament provided. There was a pretty broad choice of character skins depending on which team and which character you were playing as. Again, this just wasn't common in the 90s at all. Speaking of choices, one thing you didn't have a choice in this game was the absolute breakneck speed of it. You auto-run by default, and from what I can tell, so do all of the other bots, which combined with the armor and health system, gives the game a great sense of momentum. You want to run straight into an enemy, spamming rockets, so you can do that, and will fairly quickly be looking at the death screen, which by the way, regardless of the way you play on the higher difficulties, you'll be seeing a lot. Or you can take your time to collect armor and find the weapon of your choice and coordinate a more planned attack, which is definitely going to be needed in some of the game's more intense objective modes. As far as objective modes go, they've kept it to 6 game modes, but with a pretty decent amount of maps and more available via the community for each. You've got Deathmatch, which is your bread and butter kill everyone, Team Deathmatch, which sees you and 3 other team members take on an opposing team, Domination, which is the same as we know it in most modern shooters nowadays, tag and hold 3 areas of a map to accumulate points to win the match, Capture the Flag, which is a good risk versus reward gameplay mode, which sees you needing to return the enemy's flag to your base and vice versa. The first to a preset point limit wins. Assault was probably my favourite mode. It basically sets up your team to either attack or defend a set of objectives on a fairly large map. The team that destroy the objectives in the shortest time wins. Lastly, you have Last Man Standing, which is basically a twist on Deathmatch, where you start with a predetermined set of lives and can only respawn that many times before you become a spectator only. The last man standing is the winner. I've always believed that any first-person shooter is only as good as its weapons. It's just such an integral part of a first-person shooter experience, and I've got to say, Unreal Tournament delivers this in spades. You start off every level with the Enforcer, which is basically your run-of-the-mill pistol, with the primary fire shooting a fairly controlled shot at an average fire rate, and the secondary fire enabling you to turn the gun on 90 degrees like some sort of gangster and unload bullets slightly faster at the expense of accuracy. A nice touch is that if you pick up another one of these during play, you can actually dual wield them, and I gotta say, it feels pretty badass to do this.
I'm a bad man! You hear me?
You're not gonna wipe the floor with enemy teams with this weapon, but as far as starting weapons go, it's pretty serviceable. Next, you have the bio rifle, which shoots globs of explosive green ooze as its primary fire and offers the ability to supercharge the shot as its secondary fire, which is actually one of the most powerful single shots in the game, generally netting yourself a kill regardless of where it lands on your target. The downside of this being the charge and fire time. The shock rifle is next on the rotation, and this is pretty much a discount sniper rifle, with a primary fire of a targeted electronic pulse and a secondary shooting a charged up energy ball. If you're quick enough, you can actually shoot the secondary energy ball with the primary fire for an area of effect attack. However, depending on your opponent's mobility, your mileage with success may vary here. Next, we come to my personal favourite weapon in the game, the pulse gun. Now, the primary fire here isn't anything to write home about. In fact, it's pretty useless. But where this weapon does shine is in its secondary fire, which is basically a short to medium range hit scanning beam, basically barbecuing your opponents with plasma energy. From my favourite, we come to my least favourite, the Ripper. Now granted, the Ripper does sound pretty badass, and the real-time ricochet effects are pretty impressive for the time period, but I just could never seem to actually hit a target, with the ricocheting effect normally coming back to damage me as opposed to actually damaging my enemies. Trust me when I say this gets old really quickly. We then come to another pretty much hit-scan weapon, the minigun, probably one of the best all-rounder weapons of the game. Primary fire does moderate damage at a reasonable fire rate, where secondary fire does lower damage with a high fire rate. Then you have the flak cannon, which discharges a bunch of superheated shrapnel as its primary fire, and launches a grenade full of flak as its secondary. It definitely has its uses in the smaller maps, especially as it's pretty forgiving accuracy-wise at close range, but things really start to unravel on the larger maps, where you'll just be absolutely mowed down trying to close the gap to use the weapon. It's a bit of an unwritten law that every first-person shooter of the 90s had to include a rocket launcher, and Unreal Tournaments doesn't disappoint. Shooting either a rocket with its primary fire, or ejecting a grenade as its secondary, the rocket launcher is one of those classic weapons for me that I see my opponents using to kill me, I switch to it to use it myself, and then I'm disappointed in myself because I simply can't use it as well as my opponents. Regardless of how ordinary I am at using it, there's no doubt it's a fun weapon to use, and in the hands of an expert, extremely deadly. If the shock rifle is a discount sniper rifle, then the actual sniper rifle is a real hot dog. Sporting a variable zoom and delivering a one-shot kill to the head and doing a lot of damage anywhere else on the body, you're getting an enjoyable experience whenever you're able to pick up one of these. Talking about picking up rare things, in the few maps you can find it, the Redeemer is basically a super weapon that shoots out a thermonuclear projectile, which you can even control as it zeroes in on your target. Yeah, nasty. The last weapon you have access to, which is ironically also another weapon you start with, is the Impact Hammer. I don't really understand this weapon. It's a melee-only weapon that would struggle to break a wet paper bag open, and I definitely think the developers could have done something cooler here, like including a throwing knife or similar. But alas, there's plenty of other quality weapons to help you along your journey to be the grand champion. Outside of the weapons, you have a variety of special pickups, like a damage amplifier, a short-range teleporting tool for specific maps, and a ton of armor and health pickups that can be used to buff your durability, which becomes really important on the larger objective maps. Speaking of maps, one of the groundbreaking things that the original Unreal delivered was fully 3D environments, with relatively complex geometry for a game of that time. Up until Unreal, large areas, in particularly large outdoor areas, were sparsely detailed and remarkably flat. Unreal, and by extension Unreal Tournament, turned this concept on its head and delivered much more detailed and immersive game world. There's something for everyone level design wise. Your journey to become the grand champion will take you everywhere from underwater bases to abandoned castles and even a variety of space-based maps. Unreal Tournament offers excellent map choices. Given the weapons of Unreal Tournament are primarily range-based, I found myself having a lot more fun in the larger open area maps, as opposed to the tight corridors of some of the interior-based maps. I'm not saying the smaller scale maps are bad, it's just when you have a small map and the only real weapons that are spawning are range-based, it makes for a lot of dying to rockets that you didn't even see coming. The other benefit of the larger scale maps is they just give you more ways to approach your objective. Do you want to use a sniper and play support to your team? Or do you want to clear the way with a rocket launcher? These are both possible in larger maps. Something else that pulls you into Unreal Tournament's environments is the level interactivity. While we saw some degree of interactivity in other first-person shooters, like Duke Nukem 3D, which deserves its own video in the future, Unreal Tournament really modernised this. There's a capture the flag level where you can only find the rocket launcher on the map inside of a pressure chamber, and as you're playing through the level, there's a computer voiceover from the base you're in warning you that the pressure chamber will be activating soon. Wait too long to get the rocket launcher inside of that chamber, like I first did, and yeah, let's just say it won't end well for you. It's just another way that the game engages the player to think about the environment alongside all of the mindless killing. Then you have the assault maps. These maps basically change as you progress through them. It might be a new door that opens or a bridge that lowers, but the point is that these maps evolve as you play through them, and it makes for an incredibly immersive experience. Sound design has always been an important component of a shooter, and what Unreal Tournament delivers is nothing short of a masterclass in sound design. The soundtrack is a collection of high-energy electronic beats that wouldn't feel out of place in an early 2000s nightclub, and it just does a brilliant job of building up a great sense of energy and momentum throughout the game. There's very few soundtracks from games of this era that I can actually remember nowadays, but alongside games like GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, Unreal Tournament certainly earns its place in my memory. Every piece of music just perfectly suits the level, and anyone who disagrees with me on this, well, you're just wrong. You've got equally well created sound effects with all the other characters or bots having different voice samples, and the way the lines are delivered just perfectly complement the energy that's built up from the soundtrack. 90s games can be hit or miss with voice acting, but what's here is definitely a hit, and given how often you'll hear these voices, that's a really good thing. Weapons and effects likewise sound crisp and unique. You can tell the developers put a lot of effort into the sound design of each of the weapons to make them sound unique and memorable, and it really shows. With all my gushing praise for Unreal Tournament, it's no surprise that it was ported to virtually every other platform at the time and spawned 5 other tournament-style games, with a 6th which began development sadly cancelled in 2014, owing to Epic Games' shift away from game development to development of the tools used to create games.
Groovy, smashing, yay capitalism!
Most notably, Unreal Engine, which nowadays powers everything from Fortnite to Borderlands and plenty in between. The Unreal franchise might have started its life as a game series, but today it's a game development tool underpinning thousands of games. Which in a way is a shame, because today the only way to acquire any of the Unreal Tournament games is actually via physical copy, or just so happen to be lucky enough to have purchased it on Steam before it was pulled from the Steam store in early 2023, just as I did for this retrospective. Which means if you want to hop into a good old arena-based shooter of that era, your only real choice now is Quake 3 Arena. Not that that's a bad thing, and maybe it's my nostalgia-coloured goggles speaking, but Quake 3 Arena just didn't hit me the same way as Unreal Tournament did. Consumers and game developers have evolved a lot since Unreal Tournament was released, and that's probably why, in part, the 2014 release was cancelled. But one thing that can't be argued is the impact that Unreal Tournament had on the video games industry. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.